My dear crystal lovers, welcome back to another vlogcast. If you're new here, my name is AM and I have a wonderful web shop named Aviuvi where I provide you with the most spectacular, sustainably sourced crystals. With the vlogcasts, I love to offer you some insights into all things crystal related, metaphysics, and sustainability. And I want to point you in the direction of where you're actually able to recognize it and tune yourself into this wonderful energy. The information I'm giving you here is first of all my own interpretation, but personally and in business I do rely on various sources that I've found reliable and consistent over the years. And as always, I encourage you to use your own discernment, your own inner knowing. So as you might have experienced yourself, explaining things that are metaphysical is tricky. More often than not, I come across some pretty vague explanations on how crystals work and about metaphysics in general. Metaphysics is by definition something that you can't observe under a microscope or something that can be measured. It's beyond science. You can't necessarily see it with the naked eye either or recognize it by any of your other senses. But as an empathic human being, you will be able to feel it. This is not only true for crystal energy, but all energy. Metaphysics is sometimes difficult to explain in the language and the terms that we usually use. We don't really have a lot of words to describe a metaphysical experience, and many times they fall short of an accurate description of the experience. But there are some, I don't know if you can call it metaphors or analogies. For example, by now we are used to man-made technologies that don't interfere with our senses. And that can definitely be helpful when explaining how metaphysics work. However, I want to give you a more analog example that has to do with perception. So time and time again, my husband and I, we have to explain various types of optical illusions to our son Anka. For example, one day he was gifted a model of a modern windmill by our neighbor. She works in the windmill industry as an engineer, and we had to explain to him why the blades on the windmill became invisible when they rotated really fast. Whether or not we actually were able to explain this phenomenon in the correct terms to our curious little guy, I'm not sure, but the matter of the fact is that the blades appear invisible even though they're still there and they're solid. If we like it or not, our senses and our brain have limits for what we're able to comprehend. And let's face it too, the human senses are quite easily manipulated too. As I've mentioned before, my experience is that we are here at this moment in time, living this human life to experience a great evolution in consciousness. And with this comes what sometimes is referred to as upgrades. For the most part, upgrades feel a lot like intuition, being good at guessing what's right without having prior knowledge or experience on a subject. At other times, it is a heightened sense of empathy and connectivity with all of humanity or with animals and plants or all of the above. And then there are upgrades on the physical body. That could be sensitivity to certain foods and sensory upgrades like clairvoyance and clairaudience. Many experience that the upgrades come in waves, often with physical symptoms such as fatigue or headache, and sensitivity to processed food or tobacco, caffeine, drugs, and alcohol. But whether or not people are conscious of these quote-unquote upgrades, they are taking the steps into a more clean and stable lifestyle that certainly, in my experience, facilitates a clearer metaphysical experience, for example, with crystals. Now, I love science, obviously, I love geology, and I love when spirituality and science intersect. That is one of the things that I love most about my work. But there's so much presumed knowledge when in actuality we know very little. So instead of perceiving science as a definitive, perhaps it sometimes would be more beneficial for all of us to regard it as temporary. Let's also remember that science is actually never discovering something new, but finding ways of explaining what is already true. For example, no one needs to know the science of gravity to know the experience of gravity. People were not floating around in mid-air in the 1500s. And it's also my understanding that perhaps the scientific institutions are completely different now than they were, let's say, 50 years ago, and that there's a lot more focus on patents and profits now than there were in previous times. And perhaps that's one of the reasons why looking for a different kind of connection than the one that conventional science is providing is becoming more and more common. Working with crystals for their energetic properties is obviously not a new phenomenon either. Besides being used for jewelry, cosmetics, decorations, crystals have been used in spiritual practices all over the globe for a very long time. If you're brand new to metaphysics, raw crystals are a great place to start because they hold both the physical and the metaphysical properties. They're tangible, and you can experiment with placing them in various places in your home, for example, or on your body during meditation. If you do have a pocket-sized raw crystal, try to bring it along as you go about your day and feel into which situations you notice it the most. As a beginner, I would go for sustainably sourced raw clear quartz because clear quartz is most crystal collectors' favorite crystal, and it's mine too. But make sure to get a really beautiful and personal piece to begin with. So I've dipped my toes into many metaphysical practices, but for me, crystals work the best because they are not only physical objects, but also millions of years of natural intelligence that I am tapping into. The more you open up to the magic and wonder of the metaphysical side of existing as a human on this planet, the more you'll start to notice it all around. At some point, you might know that everything is in fact a metaphysical experience. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this vlogcast and you would like more of this type of information, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. It helps me to know what you want me to talk about, and it helps others to find this content if that is what they're looking for. I hope you'll have the most wonderful day with so much love to you and to yours.